channel, Project Professionals. Today we are tackling the PMP Project Scope Management. If you want to finish your project on time and on budget, you have to be able to say no. The knowledge area dedicated to ensuring your project includes all the work required and only the work required to complete the project successfully. So let's start with the two core concepts of scope you need to understand. That is the product scope and the project scope. Now, the product scope. This refers to the features and functions that categorize a product, service, or result. It's the what we are delivering. And the project scope is the work performed to deliver the product, service, or result. It's the how we are delivering it. So let's understand the 6 core management process. And let me share my screen. All right, I hope you can see my screen. And as you can see, the 6 scope management processes. That is the plan scope management, collecting the requirements, defining the scope, creating the WBS, validating the scope, and controlling the scope. By now, you already know it should be in the sequential order. You cannot define the scope after creating the WBS. You have to define the scope before creating the WBS, right? Now, what is the plan scope management? It is nothing but defining the rules of the game. Then you collect the requirements, you figure out what the customer needs, then you define the scope, create the official written statement, and then you create the WBS. That is breaking down the work into smaller deliverables. That is breaking down the deliverables into smaller pieces. And that is called the work packages. Once that is done, that all falls under the planning process. Then in execution, you execute the plan or the scope. In monitoring and controlling, you validate the scope and control the scope. Now, validating the scope is getting the acceptance from the customer. That is validating if you are meeting the scope correctly or if any changes are required. And finally, you control the scope. That is manage the changes to the baselines. The success of your entire project hinges on the next 2 steps: getting the requirements right and writing them down. That is collecting the requirements and defining the scope. This planning phase is the single most critical point for preventing problems later on in your project. So, collecting requirements. This is where we actively gather documents and manage stakeholders' needs and expectations. The requirements documentation is the formal written needs, and the requirements traceability matrix, also known as RTM. This ensures that every single requirement links back to the business objective or project goals. If a requirement doesn't trace back, it shouldn't be in the project, right? Otherwise, it will create the scope creep. Now, defining the scope. The output of the process is the project scope statement. This is the formal, detailed description of the project and its deliverables. It must include these 3 things. Those are project scope description, project deliverables, and project exclusions. Like what is not included in the project, it must be written it down clearly. This is critical for preventing scope creep. You must explicitly state what the project will not deliver. For example, we will deliver the software, but not the training manuals. So it must be stated clearly in the project exclusion. That is in the defining scope statement or the document. Once the scope is defined, we can't manage it until we break it down into manageable pieces. That brings us to the work breakdown structure. You might, if you're following my videos, you might already know what is WBS, the work breakdown structure. The work breakdown structure is the heart of the scope management. The WBS is the hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of work to be carried out by the project team. It's organized by deliverables and not actions. Keep in mind, it's organized by deliverables and not by action. The WBS represents 100% of the project scope, no more, no less. We don't want to have the scope creep. or you don't want to gold plate anything. Everything inside the scope statement must be reflected in the WBS, that is work breakdown structure. Now, if you remember the gold plating, gold plating is nothing but you try to accomplish more than it is asked, just to impress your customers or have your customers delighted. But in project management or PMP exam particularly, we do not gold plate anything. PMP hates the gold plating. So that's the red flag. Now, decomposition is the act of dividing the project into smaller, more manageable components. We decompose the work down to the work package level. The work package is the lowest level of the WBS. You see the lowest subtask in the WBS here in the picture. That's the work package. You then hand this work package off to the scheduling team to schedule each work package, like how much time would each work package need. Remember, WBS is a waterfall approach and not the agile approach. In one of the videos, we already learned how to manage the scope in agile. If you have not watched the video, please go ahead and watch the video. It's very, very important and for you to know the difference between the waterfall approach and agile approach, how the scope is managed. Now, the WBS is a visual hierarchical diagram, but the WBS dictionary, which we also learned in one of the videos, if you remember, is the key document. It provides the detailed description of each work package, including things like its code, account identifier, and the specific milestones for the completion. You can track the WBS back from the WBS dictionary. Combined WBS dictionary and the scope statement, uh, it um, it creates the scope statement. All right. So that's about WBS. Now we have the work defined and broken down. Our final two processes are how we ensure the work gets done and accepted without authorized changes. So that is validate and controlling the scope. The final two processes are easily confused, but they are used at different times and for different reasons. Uh, if you come across any questions regarding validating the scope or control scope, keep this in mind because these two terms are very interchangeably used, but they are quite different from each other. So, validating the scope, what does it mean? And what's the purpose of validating the scope? The purpose of validating the scope is to get the formal acceptance of the completed deliverable by the customer. Uh, while controlling the scope is to manage the changes to the scope baseline via the integrated change control process. If you don't know what is integrated change control process, go check out my video on integrated change control process. Uh, it's a detail, although it's a short video, you'll get to learn everything about integrated change control you need to know. So um, now the project manager's biggest enemy is the scope creep. Scope creep is the uncontrolled expansion of the product or project scope. It's the small, unauthorized changes that bypasses the control scope process. This happens when the project manager doesn't enforce the baselines. Scope creep is the primary cause of the project failure. So you have to be mindful of the scope creep. You don't want your project to fall in the scope creep. So there you go. Scope management is all about boundaries. Plan it by defining exclusions, execute it with the WBS, get the acceptance with the validate scope, and protect your baseline using the control scope. Hit that like button if the breakdown helped you see how to protect your project scope. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.